Hey you geeks! This week's video answers a question that I've really been wondering since the moment I finished reading Rhythm of War. Namely, what the heck is Vasher even doing on Roshar? This question became more puzzling to me recently when I did the math and found that Vasher kind of stinks as a Sanderson protagonist and cognitive shadow daddy, lacking the most basic protective instincts of most male fantasy characters of literature today. So that was percolating on the back burner while I got all of your guys' wonderful comments on last week's video regarding my Shard Valor observation. And that inspired me. So thank you for the comments. Please keep them coming as I now explain why I think Vasher is an Roshar, even if he doesn't know why. Mainly because he's part of Valor's super secret plan to take on Odium. Let's break it down. Spoilers, of course, for the Stormlight Archive through Wind and Truth, and the end of Warbreaker, of course. Maker of Nightblood. I read the Stormlight Archive before I read Warbreaker, out of order I know, and well, I was utterly spoiled that Zahel the Grouchy Swordmaster would be the same character as Vasher, the morally gray shadow lurker of Warbreaker. Had I not been told that information up front, I would have found the two to be very different on page. Vasher in Warbreaker is proactively trying to stop a city from going to war with its neighbor and may be dubious about it, but he's doing stuff and taking names and releasing squirrels.
Squirrel!
When we meet Zahel, he ain't doing much on Roshar. And as far as we know, doing absolutely nothing to stop the war on the Shattered Plains. So I began to wonder, maybe it's not about what Zahel is currently doing on Roshar, but that his importance is who he brought with him to Roshar, and what he had already done. Specifically, before the Stormlight Archive even begins, Vasher brought 5 scholars to Roshar, where they learned about honor blaze. Then bringing that knowledge back to Nalthis, they forged Nightblood, a sword to destroy all evil, whatever that is, as Nightblood itself explains. Yep, he came to your lands, saw the honor blades, and thought to himself, my sword can't talk. That's dumb. I want a sword that can talk. So he made me with Shashara. Now, Sanderson often refers to the book Warbreaker as the sword's origin story, although it's not much of an origin story, and it is named after Warbreaker, which is Vasher's returned title, or the first one anyway. One could argue that Warbreaker is actually the story of Vasher coming into himself again and recognizing his own inner divine glory and making reparations for past war crimes, as one does. However, by the end of Warbreaker, he just rides off into the sunset as grumpy and slovenly as ever, the same cowboy who rode into town. By the time we meet him in Words of Radiance, he is in fact a worse version of Ye Olde Cowboy, and as he acknowledges in his own interlude in Wind and Truth. Not for the first time, he wondered why he kept struggling. Centuries. Friends failed. Most recently a woman abandoned when she'd so believed in him. He had told himself he was retiring. In truth, he'd simply run. Thus, Vasher returned to Roshar and brought Nightblood with him, but shortly thereafter, somehow the two parted ways. Knowing the Skybreakers, they probably just went to investigate a disturbance and found a sword lying in a heap of bodies, as Vasher was apt to do on Nalthis. Leave Nightblood unattended, then just go find the sword in a heap of bodies somewhere nearby when he was done doing his thing. But Nightblood was not the only person Zahel brought with him to Roshar on his second journey, since his flight from Nalthis brought Vivenna following him with her own awakened blade. So we can credit, in part, to Vasher, Kholinar standing for a time against the Singer army, and Zeth's, entire journey as a Skybreaker, from him choosing to follow Dalinar on the Battle of Thaylen Field, all the way up to him abandoning his oaths and then using Nightblood to kick some honor bear ace and save the world at the end of Wind and Truth. So Vasher's presence hasn't been entirely useless to Roshar, yet actively he's still a far cry from the shadow-lurking, squirrel-releasing vigilante of justice of sorts that we saw on Nalthis. But perhaps all of that shenaniganery is not needed, since he has done consistently one positive thing on Roshar, and that is Trainer of Heroes. Zahel, as trainer of the next generation of Night Radiant heroes, is something that I definitely overlooked in my estimation of him. We first meet him in Words of Radiance as Adolin's former Swordmaster and Renarin's future Swordmaster. And Zahel, to his credit, senses Kaladin's investiture and soon basically adopts Kaladin, as all decent people do. Surprisingly, in Kaladin's moment of crisis in Words of Radiance, he actually gives Kaladin some decent advice that also points to Vasher's unknown tortured past. Have you ever had to choose between two equally distasteful choices? Every day I choose to keep breathing. Choose the option, Zahel said, rearranging his pillow, that makes it easiest for you to sleep at night. The old Ardent closed his eyes and settled back. That's what I wish I'd done. One could wonder if Zahel is actually hearkening back to the days when he had to take breath from small children as the equally distasteful options that he had to choose from. But also, Zahel's starting a huge war on Nalthis and then killing his first wife to stop said war, then abandoning Vivenna are probably all decisions that keep Zahel up at night and not in a pleasant way. Thus, it's understandable that he's still incredibly jaded about this whole situation.
So you wanna be a hero, kid? Well, whoop-de-doo.
Following Words of Radiance, we get consistent good Zahel mentor moments. In Oathbringer, he mentors Dalinar. In Rhythm of War, he mentors Kaladin, telling him what is soon to be crucial information about what it means to be a cognitive shadow daddy of sorts. In Wind and Truth, when it's revealed that Vasher was being imprisoned by Axendweth for his breaths. A few days later, of course, we get the Lift interlude where she comes to rescue her AVR chicken and just decides that she'll rescue the ugly old man Vasher Zahel as well. And Zahel recognizes her potential and agrees to mentor her going into the back five. Thus, Zahel is again set up to be a key trainer of a hero, Lift, who, as far as we know, will be the only Radiant able to use her investiture outside of Urithiru when the back five begins. But before we start speculating about the back five, I think it's important to remember that Zahel trained Adolin, and Adolin, Vivenna, and Kaladin, we've seen them use his stabby techniques in action. Yet we've further seen Adolin become Swordmaster to Yanagon, Emperor of Yazir, where Adolin considers it an important part of Yanagon's training to teach the lad towers. Thus, I think it's safe to assume that Vasher Zahel taught Adolin Towers, even if Vasher's preferred game is Terra Chin. From Adolin's fight scene and the climax of Oathbringer, we know that Zahel taught him some practical applications for fighting an enemy who has more power than you, so it follows that Zahel would have also been the one to use towers and teach Adolin the more principles of how to win against a stronger opponent. And this is a skill set that we've seen in Warbreaker, at which Zahel currently excels quite well. Vasher moved his arm up, touching Denth's leg. My life to yours, my breath become yours. Denth froze, then stumbled. 50 breaths fled from Vasher's chest and surged into Denth's body. They would be unwelcome, but he couldn't turn them away. 50 breaths, not many, but enough. Enough to make Denth shake with pleasure. Enough to make him lose control for just a second, falling to his knees, and in that second, Vasher stood, ripping the dagger free from the corpse beside him, then slashed it through Denth's throat. It struck me this past week that although Dalinar couches his logic in the Sunmaker's gambit of towers, his plan to give Taravangian extra investiture in order to weaken him for future attacks is so gosh darn close to Vasher's playbook that we saw at the end of Warbreaker that in world I can't help but wonder if something of Vasher's teaching of Adolin might have rubbed off subconsciously into old dog Dalinar. Now, we could break the fourth wall and say, well, Sanderson just likes that kind of plot twist to win a fight in the end. But Sanderson doesn't really repeat fight endings all that often. And if he does, he is always careful to still couch them in each of the character's specific circumstances and power level. In Dalinar's case, Taravangian, or at least Odium, willingly welcomed the new Shard of Honor, seeing more power as a good thing. And instead of a few seconds of disorientation for Taravangian, we're getting like decades of time dilation and self-reflection as he reforges the Shard of Retribution for himself. And it is in these decades or so that Zahel will train Lift, Kaladin will help start to heal the Heralds, and the Knight Radiant orders as a whole will be able to rise again, rearm, and plan a brutal attack against Retribution itself. Still, Zahel seemed grouchily and utterly unaware of all the positive impact his presence on Roshar has had for Team Radiant in their fight against Odium and now Retribution. He seems utterly just angry at Endowment for returning him and denying in himself that he had some divine returned destiny, as we've seen other returns use in Warbreaker itself. So I can't help but wonder what Zahel's original destiny as a returned even was, and how that led him to Roshar not once, but twice. Valor's plan. Finally, we get to my latest theory that you guys in the comment section helped me tease out of my unorganized observations of Vasher's lack of shadow daddiness. First, you challenged my interpretation of Endowment's letter to Hoyd, specifically the part where she says, "As for Valor, our dealings are none of your business, for largely the same reasons. Can you not leave her alone? All I will say is that I have kept my bargain, and I did not go in person at her request for aid." Now, I had interpreted this to mean that Endowment had refused to send Valor aid in her time of need. Unfortunately, as an audiobook reader, Michael Whalen had chosen to read Endowment's letter in a tone not dissimilar from his reading of Grendel's voice in The Wheel of Time, so that just sends sinister shivers down my spine whenever I hear it. You guys, however, did not carry that bias, and I had to reconsider my perception.
Am I so out of touch?
One of you fine viewers suggested that Endowment had in fact sent others in her place to help Valor with her thing, which got me wondering. We really haven't seen a lot of world hoppers from Nalthis across the Cosmere in general, except for, of course, the 5 scholars, including Vasher, followed by Vasher on his own, Nightblood, and Vivenna. Yet all of those people we know of went to Roshar. Another of you fine commenters also questioned why I thought Valor would leave just heaps of investiture lying around Canticle if she was trying to be discreet. I still don't have an answer for that question, but it got me questioning my own theory, wondering why would Valor call for aid to get help to hide her shard? Like, isn't this the opposite of Valor's own intent? Valor, after all, means strength of mind or spirit that enables a person to encounter danger with firmness or personal bravery. You think Valor would be the last person to hide from a fight. Yet, third commenter, as I was drafting this very script, pointed out that discretion is the better part of valor. And that is what distinguishes valor, I'd say, from bravery. No one has ever accused a Gryffindor in all of Hogwarts history of being discreet. But valor can be discreet. And that is what I think she is doing in her fight against Odium. Being discreet and asking Endowment for aid.
Got knuckles for aid!
But it doesn't make sense that if she is hiding herself from Odium, for her to ask Valor to send 2 or few servants of Endowment through the physical and or cognitive realm to go seek out Valor at her super secret hiding spot where they could be potentially tracked. And also, as an underlying issue that I'd had with Wind and Truth reading it, I was just confused as to what the heck this whole other deal with Valor had to do with the plot of the Stormlight Archive itself. We know from Wind and Truth that Honor tried calling for Valor's aid. I made one final attempt at locating Valor, the great dragon god Meladentorius, as she was a warrior who would surely join me. Meladentorius was not to be found. Now, forgive me, last week when I read this quote, I identified this as happening before the Recreants, when in fact it happens right before Honor forges the Oath Pact with the Heralds. So he's still pretty sane and has a pretty good grasp on the nature of the dragon Meladentorius and her shard Valor. So even then, Valor is already hiding and did not answer his call. Still, a relatively short time later, we know that Vasher must have returned on Nalthis as Warbreaker the Peaceful. And in that moment before he returned, one can assume that he'd had a similar experience to what Lightsong the Bold recalls having with Endowment himself. He remembered standing on the other side of a brilliant, colorful wave of light, looking down at the world from the other side, and seeing everything he loved dissolve into the destruction of war. A war greater than any the world had known, a war more deadly even than the Many War. He remembered the other side, and remembered a voice, calm and comforting, offering him an opportunity to return. So what if Edgley had shown human Vasher at the time a vision of Odium's war for the entire Cosmere? And that vision is what inspired Vasher to return as Warbreaker. We know that relatively early in his life as a returned, he and the 5 scholars up and go to Roshar in time to see an actual desolation of the planet by Odium's forces. So far, so good. Though upon returning to Nalthis, they forged Nightblood and things got a little bit out of hand after that.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
But as Endowment maintains in her letter to Hoid that she has a plan to deal with Odium, and it's going great because Hoid is not interfering with it, so she's not going to tell Hoid any of the information lest he interfere and ruin everything again. She also indicates that she has dealings with Valor that are separate, but she's not going to tell Hoid anything about them either, lest he interfere and ruin everything again. But Endowment's a shrewd lady, so I think that she could be misleading him on the nature of her dealings with Valor and that they are the plan to overthrow Odium. And frankly, with Vasher's work on Roshar thus far, she's not doing too bad. I think that Valor contacted Endowment after Honor failed to get a hold of her, and Endowment sought out Vasher in his moment of death, knowing that he would be the sort of person to have the skills necessary to thwart a shard like Odium himself. So, keeping to her own shard's intent, she gave Warbreaker to Roshar in the form of Vasher. However, Vasher, of course, forgot the whole conversation and is now just operating on his base investiture's intent alone, even if he doesn't know why, as he explained to Kaladin at the beginning of Rhythm of War. The longer one of us exists, the more like a spren we become, consumed by a singular purpose. Our minds bound and chained by our intent. We're spren, masquerading as men. That's why she takes our memories. Though, given all the personality Sanderson has given to the spren over Rhythm of War and Wind and Truth especially, I don't think Vasher can become a complete slave to his investiture's intent of fighting Odium, but he is rather amenable to its suggestions that he should just up and leave Nalthis for no apparent reason and flee to Roshar, where the weather is terrible and there's a giant ongoing war, where he, his tactics in training heroes, and his Destroyer of Evil sword will be greatly needed. So that is what I think Vasher is doing on Roshar, being an unwitting yet effective pawn in Endowment and Valor's plan to take on Odium, now Retribution. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Of course, even if I disagree, you might change my mind on something else. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. See you next week. Bye!